also zooming in, but otherwise I think we're ready to go. And we're hoping that you can give us an update, not a huge, long update, but we've got a half hour just to hear about how the implementation's going.
Sure.
School meals.
So for the record, Rosie Kruger, I'm the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Agency of Education. It's good to see you all. So generally, the implementation of the Permanent Universal Meals Act is going well, going very smoothly. And so I think that's in large part to all the time you all took last year to listen to our recommendations about all the little technical changes and incorporate those. And so with all of those technical changes, there really haven't been a lot of hiccups this year in implementing, and it's been a pretty smooth transition. Overall participation in the meals programs is up slightly from last year, not by a huge amount, but a slight bump in participation. And we do have final costs for you from school year 22-23. So those did come in lower than we had anticipated. It ended up costing about $24.5 million to implement last year, and you had appropriated, I think, 29 million. I think we told you mid-year that it might come in closer to 27 million. And the reason for that difference was we made that mid-year estimate based on the assumption that children who qualified for free, reduced, and paid meals would all eat in equal proportion to each other. So overall, the participation numbers were actually right on our estimates. The total number of meals served last year was right about what we thought it would be mid-year. But we found that free and reduced eligible students actually ate at higher rates compared to their peers. And so that brought down the overall costs. And we didn't know what those proportions would be when we made those mid-year estimates. So that's kind of as you would hope and expect in implementing this policy, but it wasn't something we knew for sure. So that's one of the things that brought that cost down. And then the other thing that brought the cost down was that you might remember that there was a very wide range of estimates initially. And at the top end of the range, we were making the assumptions that no households would return applications once meals were free, and that all students would eat. And then at the bottom end of that range, we were making the assumptions that the exact same number of students would eat as before before meals were free, and that the exact same number of households would return applications. And so we did, in fact, find last year that some households returned applications. We did have a drop, but some households did still return applications. And we saw some increase in participation, but not 100% of students eating. So that's why we ended up a little bit lower last year. Going into this year, we have had some changes at the federal level that you might have heard about, and those have also had a really a good impact on costs from the state perspective. And so we were projecting to you last year that we were hoping to get approval to participate in the and actually implement USDA's direct certification through Medicaid pilot. So this is a pilot that allowed the state to use data from the Department of Health Access about children who were in households participating in Medicaid with household incomes under 185% of the federal poverty level and under 130% of the federal poverty level, and use that data to directly certify students for free and reduced price meals instead of relying on applications from the families. And we did, in fact, we were able to successfully implement that, and we started sharing that data with the schools in August. That was a lot of work on the part of some staff at AOE and Department of Vermont Health Access, but and at schools too, frankly. But we made that happen, and so far that appears to be going very successfully. And it looks like we're really kind of effectively replacing all the data that we used to get via applications with that new direct certification data, which is great. It means that that little drop we saw last year in applications has actually been totally negated this year. So again, bringing down our costs for this year and going forward. Another positive impact at the federal or positive change at the federal level, which is kind of combined with that Medicaid pilot, is that in September, the USDA finalized their rule around the community eligibility provision. So you might remember that the community eligibility provision is the more advantageous way for schools to offer universal meals. The federal government pays a little bit more money, and it means a little bit less paperwork for the schools. And in addition, the children in a CEP school qualify for free internet through the Affordable Connectivity Program. So every child in that school qualifies. So it's a great option, but previously only schools with a direct certification rate of 40% or more qualified to participate in CEP. And with this rule change that USDA made in September, schools or groups of schools with a 25% direct certification rate qualify to participate. Normally, a rule change like that at the start of the school year, we would not have been able to take advantage of that until the following school year. But we applied for and received a waiver from USDA to allow us to do mid-year implementation of CEP cycles. So that was kind of a scramble to do that at the start of the school year and get all that data. Normally, that's data that we would be getting and validating over the summer months. But we worked really hard with the schools to make that happen. And initially, USDA told us that to do the mid-year implementation, we needed to use data from last April, which was before we had all that new Medicaid data. So with that, we had, I believe, 73 schools that became newly eligible to participate in CEP. After we'd gone through and validated all that data and got all those schools set up, in late November, USDA came back to us and told us that actually we could use the September data. So September 2023 data includes all that new direct certification data from Medicaid. So it's very advantageous. And of course, we wanted to go ahead and use that. So since then, in December and January, my team has been working with schools to get new data from September and validate all of that. And so at this point, because of that, we have 109 total schools who are newly eligible for CEP this year, bringing us up to 228 schools that are participating in CEP. So the majority of our schools are now participating in CEP, and taking all that data, that direct certification data, you might remember that there's a multiplier for CEP schools. So we get to take the number of students who are directly certified for free meals, and we multiply that by 1.6, and that is the number of meals that we can claim at the free reimbursement rate. So when we take all of that into consideration, all of that change, we're looking at having a free and reduced rate in Vermont statewide of above 50%, which is huge. That's, when we were doing our initial estimates, previously we were talking about rates in the range of 34 to 38%. So this means significantly more of the meals that are being served are being fully reimbursed at the free rate by the federal government. We're still validating additional CEP data for additional schools. And so I can tell you that the rate is over 50%. Once we finish that validation, hopefully in the next few weeks here, we'll be able to give you the actual rate. Now that takes effect mid-year. And so there's a little bit of, I've been trying to figure out, okay, how does that actually impact our costs for this year? I was in Senate Education last week and gave them an updated estimate that we thought you all had appropriated $29 million for universal meals this year, and we thought it was going to come in closer to 26.5 million. We think now, based on this data, that it's going to be even lower than that, but we're still kind of validating that and coming up with a final estimate, which we hope to have to you pretty shortly here. But it's all good news. It's because of all these changes combined with each other, the policy is costing the state a lot less, and that will be true for the foreseeable future. So once folks are locked into a CEP cycle, they have the option to start a new cycle if the data is more advantageous, but otherwise they can use that data, that original data, for 4 years. So we're looking certainly at the next bunch of years being similar. And then there's a possibility that 4 years out from now, when we go to start new CEP cycles, that we may have fewer schools qualifying and rates being a little bit lower, because our Medicaid data that we're using right now still includes a lot of carryover from folks during the pandemic. And as folks fall off Medicaid due to validations that are starting up again post-pandemic, those numbers may be a little bit lower, but at this point, that's looking 4+ years out, and who knows what our economy, et cetera, is going to look like at that point. So basically, I've got good news for you for the next few years, and just excited to report that. This is also going to have a really, oh, was there a question there?
Nope.
Okay. This is also going to have a really positive impact on our ability to offer free summer meals and free after-school meals. So you might remember that a school needs to have a 50% free and reduced rate in order to qualify to be an open summer meal site. And when they do that, they qualify not only a school, but also other locations within their community. And so again, we're still kind of parsing these numbers. We're just getting all the numbers from the new CEP schools in, but we're going to have significantly more more sites statewide that are going to be eligible to be open meal sites this summer. We'll be sending out a press release that we do every year by February 1st, really trying to recruit new sponsors. And so that's something that I would love for you all to know about as you're talking to folks in your communities. Once we figure out where those locations are that are going to be area eligible, we'll be looking for community partners who are willing to sponsor sites or to work with their school district to manage a site that the school district is sponsoring, so that we can make sure that we're really fully taking advantage of having all those new open sites. And those sites can serve kids 0 to 18. So we're not talking about just kids enrolled in the school there. So that'll be over the summer months. And then USDA has implemented the change that Congress made last year to allow for non-congregate meals in the summertime in rural areas. And so in Vermont, most of the state qualifies for this option, with the exception of Chittenden County and then a few spots in Grand Isle and Franklin counties. So we will be working with schools and other sponsors to figure out what the best fits are for their community. But we do hope that we'll be able to offer a lot more non-congregate meals this summer as well. And again, have those be open to all kids 0 to 18, not just kids who have gone through the paperwork process. And that same area eligibility applies to after school meals as well. And so again, that's an area for growth, is just making sure that all those schools who are newly eligible are aware that they can offer these after school meals programs for free to all children. So those are all the really positive changes that we've seen this year. I did want to flag for you that I know you'd had a lot of discussion about independent schools and whether they should be included and how they should be included. So in the kind of first pilot year of universal meals last year, it was unclear to the agency how to handle independent schools that were sites under a public school food authority. So we asked for clarity on that. And the legislature decided that those sites should be treated the same as other independent schools. And so that those sites should only be eligible for the universal meal supplement if they provided meals at no charge to all students, and only the meals served to publicly tuitioned kids at those sites would be eligible for the universal meal supplement. The independent school would need to come up with another source of funds for the remaining meals. And so we went ahead and implemented that change after getting that clarification from the legislature. And as a result of that, we did have 2 independent schools that had been participating as sites under public school food authorities that did ultimately leave those school food authorities and have actually stopped participating in the program. So those were St. Michael's Catholic School in, I believe, Brattleboro, had been participating under Windham Northeast Supervisory Union, and Christ the King School in Rutland had been participating under Rutland City School District. And so they have left the program. I think their intention was to come back as a pricing program on their own, not under those school food authorities, but we haven't seen them complete the paperwork to do that yet. So that was one impact. In general, you did make permanent the requirement that all public schools participate in the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program and offer universal meals. And you removed an exemption process that had previously existed. So at this point, all public schools in Vermont are participating in both programs and have taken the carrot to not only offer universal meals, but to do it in the way that draws down the most federal funds. And we have seen some interest from additional independent schools who weren't previously participating in the program. And so we may be onboarding some additional schools going forward. And again, they would be reimbursed just for the publicly tuitioned students at those schools. Let's see, 2 additional impacts that I wanted to flag for you all. As we have more schools moving to CEP, under CEP, there's actually not a reduced price category. So the meals are either claimed at the free reimbursement rate or at the paid reimbursement rate. And a number of years ago, Vermont had passed a law having the state pay for the reduced price portion of both breakfast and lunch. And so there is some money appropriated for that every year. And we're seeing that, last year we did not use that money. We're certainly not on track to use. We've used some of it, but not all of it, and we're certainly not on track to use all of it this year. So I think going forward, we'll be adjusting that ask based on the fact that we have far fewer reduced price meals with all of our schools, with many of our schools qualifying for CEP. And then finally, we are seeing some schools that have food service management companies, they had existing contracts with management companies, and some of those schools had contracts. They're all a per meal contract where they pay the food service management company per meal. And a few school food authorities had contracts where their payment to the management company was actually less than the reimbursement rate. And so in a situation where they were only serving meals to a small portion of their students, it all kind of, evened out. But some of those schools are beginning to build up balances of excess net cash resources. It's not a problem that we're used to having in the child nutrition programs. And so we're starting to see a few schools that had existing contracts with management companies build that up. We may come back to you in the future with a recommendation to adjust the law. If somebody has excess net cash resources for multiple years, we're not ready to do that yet. Our hope is that as these schools go out to bid again in the future, they're going to really focus on meal quality, and that may end up kind of right sizing the cost there, so that those schools would have higher meal quality and be fully utilizing the full reimbursement rate.
We've got a question, Rosie, Representative Cole.
Just to make sure I'm understanding what you said correctly, the net excess cash resources that we're getting, those are all due to a drawdown from the federal government. It is not due to, taxation like Vermont tax that is just going in, excess to these schools.
I would say it's a combination. So they're getting the full reimbursement rate at the free rate for every meal that they serve. And it is a combination now of state and federal funds because it's a universal meal supplement plus the paid federal reimbursement rate for every paid meal. And it is the free reimbursement rate for every free meal. And so they're not used to getting that much. They're used to having unpaid bills and having to sell a la carte items to kind of balance out their budgets. And so there are a few of the larger districts where management companies, in order to win the bids, have really cut every last cost so that they can be the management company with the lowest price and win the bid. And that price is lower than the per meal reimbursement rate that they're getting, which is that the school is getting, which is a combination of the federal and state funding. That money is accruing at the school in the School Food Service Authority account. It's not going to the management company. And so they have options to spend that money. They could spend it on staffing for the programs, new equipment. There's a variety of things that they could spend it on. The thing we would really like to see them spend it on is meal quality. And those schools are a little less agile because they have these contracts that are usually multi-year contracts. So we're hoping that over time, we'll see them, specifying in their contracts that they're looking for better quality food, perhaps more local food items, and that when the management companies come back to bid, they'll be taking that into account and be providing a higher quality item. But of course, to do that, they're going to have to charge more, and we're hoping that we'll see that right size. If that doesn't happen, then we would absolutely be back here asking you to make a change where we would be able to either reduce the funds that we're paying out for in that situation or take funds back. But we're not, 1 year in, I think we're not quite at a place where we would be ready to make that suggestion.
To follow up there, that's super helpful information. Is there a way for our committee to identify which schools are falling into that category of having this excess?
Yeah.
pool of funds?
So we have a financial report every year that every school food authority has to do. They do it in December based on the prior school year. So we do have the data for last year and who had excess net cash resources as of June of 2023. And so we can certainly pull that information and provide it to you. And again, they've got options for spending that money, and some of them may have gone ahead and spent that since June. And we encourage folks to look at, is there equipment that would lead to better meal quality? Some of them may be currently paying for staff for the program that aren't food service management company employees. They might be paying for that out of school general funds. And of course, that's a cost to the school, which really should be borne by the school food service program. So we would encourage them to look at, moving those funds over. So there's just a lot of kind of right sizing that is happening right now with those programs as they're getting used to having this additional source of funding.
Representative Rice?
Thanks. Yeah. Rosie, I just wonder if you are having conversations. You say that you hope that, this will lead to the situation that you described where they're prioritizing meal quality, but I would just love to hear if you're having conversations that sort of like give reason for that hope. But hoping that things change is a scary thing.
No, so I can say that we are actually very active on that. So according to federal regulations, when someone has excess net cash resources, they need to come up with a spend down plan. They're not allowed to have more than 3 months of operating expenses on hand. So the reason they do that financial report is for us to be able to see that. So we've now assigned all those schools who had an excess net cash resources to write their spend down plans. We've given a fair amount of technical assistance about what appropriate things to spend that money on would be. And then we'll be reviewing those spend down plans, which are due this spring. If we find that, those are not appropriate, we'll be going back and kind of working with them to get a plan that will actually spend down those funds. And then the other place where we've really tried to intervene here is in our state contract, or we have a template contract at the state level that schools who wish to use a management company are required to use. And there's a lot of required language in there, but there's also some suggested language. And so we've started to add a lot of suggested language around meal quality and around local foods. And so if somebody's not, if they just take our template and don't make a lot of changes to it, they will default to having all of those things in there. They also could decide to take those things out. They're not required parts of it. we're trying to kind of make it as easy as possible for folks to adopt those higher standards. So those are some things that we're doing there. And again, this is just folks with management companies. The schools that don't have management companies and that are independently operated are much more agile and able to make these changes. And in fact, have already started to do that.
Thank you. And is that template contract, can you share that with us or?
Sure.
direct us to it?
It's quite intense, but I'm happy to share it with you.
And then can you we might have talked about this last year, but can you just remind sort of generally what percentage of schools are in contracts with management companies for food service?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. We have a number of really large districts that are in contracts. So Southwest Vermont and Rutland City, quite a few of the districts kind of in the Franklin County area. Most of the districts in Chittenden County are not using management companies. And then I would say in the rest of the state, it's kind of a mixture. But certainly if you've got a question about a particular district, I can tell you that. And then that's definitely, it's information we certainly have. I just don't have it.
Yeah, just curious, like, when we're talking about that pool of folks who are in these contracts, are we talking about half the schools?
Well,
More than half?
so no, it's definitely not more than half. So of the schools that have management companies, it's only a handful that have a per meal rate that is lower than the reimbursement rate. And Southwest Vermont is one that I'm thinking of offhand. There may be like just a couple others. It's more often that the rate being charged by the management company is actually higher than the reimbursement rate, in which case the school food authority is needing to come up with general funds to make up the difference. So this is not a wide scale problem. And as I mentioned, we're not ready to make a recommendation on it because we want to see this play out a little bit longer and see. But it was something of note for a couple school food authorities, I would say.
Thank you.
Rosie, before we wrap up, and thank you for this good news report. It's been very encouraging in a number of ways. I had heard a concern that may not be in your area of jurisdiction. It relates to it from independent schools. This is back in the fall when school districts were beginning to budget and were getting initial estimates perhaps of what their poverty rates would be. And for estimating their weights, people weights. So now I'm getting out of your area of jurisdiction, but the concern was raised in the context of independent school meals because those districts that don't operate a school were having trouble or were concerned about, I think, return rates on the new form that's being collected. So the new data collection tools. And I haven't had a follow-up conversation. I'm not sure whether it turned out to be a problem or not. Do you have any insight into that?
I know the agency had to provide a lot of technical assistance and kind of help folks figure out how to move forward with this. So under the federal rules, direct certification, the Medicaid direct certification, as well as the other sources of direct certification for SNAP and Three Squares Vermont and Reach Up, that can only be provided by the state to schools that actually participate in the National School Lunch Program. And independent schools are allowed to participate in the National School Lunch Program. We have about 20 that do, but they're not required to. And so we can't provide that direct certification data to any school that doesn't participate. Once a school gets it because they are participating, then they're allowed to use it for other educational purposes. And those are kind of locked down by the federal rules, but the sorts of purposes that, figuring out, total levels of student poverty for other educational programs are allowed purposes. So I think there was independent schools, perhaps for the first time, I'm not sure, maybe were looking for this information and they weren't able to access it if they didn't participate in the National School Lunch Program. Now, the Agency of Education also now has this statewide household income form, which is to be used anytime you're not collecting the free and reduced meal application or getting direct certification information. And that is available to all independent schools. And there's an electronic version of it as well as a paper version of it. And the electronic version comes through the agency and then gets pushed back out to whichever school the child attends and then can be used from there. So there is another way for them to get that data, but there is no incentive for families to return it the way that there might have been if it was around getting a free meal. Now, if those schools weren't participating in the school meals programs in the first place, they really shouldn't have been using the free and reduced meal application originally, and they would have had that incentive anyway. So I'm not entirely sure what the concern was there, but I think some things did change in terms of what folks are being asked for, and it did become clear that they were not allowed to get the direct certification data if they didn't participate in the meals program.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, this was a district, non-operating district where the schools in the area were participating. But that the district.
Yeah, so in that case, the schools that are participating can get the data for the students that are enrolled at the schools that are participating in the meals programs. And then once they've gotten it for the purposes of the school meals program, they are allowed to use it for other educational purposes and they can share it for that purpose. So I think it did take some technical assistance on our part to let those schools who are participating know that they could share that back to those sending districts.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll follow up with the district who I heard this from, and if there's an ongoing concern, I'll maybe check with you and you can help me.
Yeah, we'd be happy to clarify that.
Thank you. All right, let's see, a couple other questions. Representative Cole.
I know we're wrapping up on time here, but I did have two questions inspired by a few things you said. One, I also want to express gratitude to you for working with such urgency and going through all the federal loopholes that you had to do in order to get that earlier qualification to draw down federal money with the Medicaid expansion and the new CEP rates. So thank you. I know that was a lot. And so do you think now that the first time, we've done this for the first time with this new system, do you think that future years will be a little bit easier because we've experimented with this new Medicaid program? And that's just first quick question, but.
Yeah, I think the schools have gotten the hang of getting the Medicaid data. We'll be able to continue to give that to them on a monthly basis going forward. We will, in April, we'll be collecting from them the number of students who are directly certified at that point, and that will tell us whether schools are eligible to start a new cycle and if that new cycle would be more advantageous than the cycle that they're already in. And so we will be using the flexibility that you all, or the authority that you all gave us to tell schools that if it would be more advantageous, that they'll need to start a new CEP cycle. If it would not be more advantageous, then they'll stay in the old cycle for the remainder of that cycle. So that's kind of our normal, that's back to the normal. It does mean that once folks are in a CEP cycle, there's a little less paperwork when we come out to do the reviews. We don't have to look at free and reduced meal applications. And of course, they don't have to collect those applications anymore.
Yeah.
So
good. So it sounds like some of our admin costs will continue to go down.
Yeah, I would say we haven't seen a lot of feedback that folks' admin costs have been reduced so far, partially because of all these changes. And we have to keep going back and saying, actually, we don't want your April data, we want your September data. But I think over the next couple of years, as we stop having to start new cycles and kind of get to take advantage of the existing cycles, that there will be a little less paperwork for sure.
Great. And my other question, and it may be more relevant for another conversation, but as a committee, we decided to include the LFI grant at the end of Local Foods Incentive Grant as part of this policy. And I don't know if now or at another time we want to speak to how that has played out this year, and has participation increased, decreased, just kind of an update on that and how effective it is?
So we provided a report to you all earlier this week, as we're required to every year, and that is quite a thorough report, and talks in detail about the trends that we saw between last year and this year, and how those funds are being spent. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. And then if you've got additional questions, Connor Floyd on my team is the one who wrote that report and manages that grant for us. And he's very knowledgeable about all of this. So he would be the one who would be the best person for you all to bring in to ask about that. But there are some items in there. We did go back to schools that had qualified last year or their numbers dropped this year and asked them about some challenges. And one theme that came up very frequently was beef. And whether or not a school can purchase local beef and find a source of local beef seems to be a big determining factor in whether or not they can qualify for the local foods incentive. And there was a lot of concern that there's not enough availability of local beef at the price point that makes sense for schools. And so that seems to be a hurdle right now.
Mm-hmm.
We will thank you for referring us to Connor. So we'll take a look at the report, and then I think it would be great to have him come in and have more conversation about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have time for another question, I think Representative O'Brien.
It's quick. What's a non-congregate meal?
Oh, yeah, great question. So the child nutrition programs historically have been very focused on, there have been federal regulations that say that the meal has to be served to a child and the child has to eat it on site. And I would speculate that the reason for that is, there's some food safety reasons for that, especially in summer. You don't want a child to take a meal off site and then leave it sitting in their car on a hot day and then come back to it. And but I think there's also a little bit of a, wanting to make sure it's the child actually getting the meal rather than somebody else. And so those have historically been absolutely required in all the programs that meals have to be served in a congregate setting. So during COVID, obviously that was not able to happen. And so the federal government gave a lot of flexibility and we applied for a lot of waivers to allow for non-congregate meals to happen. And that effectively was a really interesting pilot into, okay, if we don't require the child to come on site and eat the meal at the specific time, does it make sense to provide them multiple days worth of meals at one time? And what do we need to do in order to ensure food safety? How do we make it clear that the meals are for children only? And so we really got to try all that out. And so last December, Congress decided to take that knowledge and actually make it a permanent part of the summer meals program and allow for non-congregate meals in rural areas only. And fortunately for Vermont, most of the state qualifies as rural.
Mm-hmm.
And so that allows us to send meals home with kids, and that can take a couple of different forms. It can mean grab and go, where the kid or the kid's guardian comes and picks up a meal and takes it off site. It can mean household delivery or delivery routes, bus stop delivery, and it can mean multiple days worth of meals at one time. And then when you do multiple days worth of meals at one time, you have the option of either providing, 7 unitized meals that are like, sandwiches pre-made, or actually doing what we call bulk meals, where rather than providing the pre-made sandwiches, we provide you a loaf of bread and, a bunch of sliced cheese and that sort of thing, so that the meals can be made by the household. So we have lots of guidance on that and work a lot with sponsors on how to do that properly. But that's what's meant by non-congregate meals.
Thank you.
Representative Temple.
Sorry, just one more question, Rosie. I'm wondering if there are any ancillary benefits that you're seeing. For example, improved enrollment, not enrollment, attendance, for example, and if that's being recorded at all, or other ancillary benefits.
Yeah, it's not something that we have had the capacity to study at this point. I'm really curious to find out about that, and certainly. There is raw data there on the child nutrition side in terms of, what schools are participating, and I would imagine that there's other data being collected at the agency that could be used for around attendance. But we don't have the capacity at this point to really study that. And I'm hopeful that now that there are, I think, 8 or 9 other states participating in this, that we'll start to see some analysis of that. And in fact, I did see a study the other day coming out of Oregon showing significantly reduced suspension rates from schools participating in CEP. I haven't had a chance to really dig into that, but it shows that there are researchers looking into this. So that's been interesting.
Be continued.
We continued indeed, yeah. Rosie, it's always a pleasure for our committee to have you visit us in person or remotely. So thank you for the update, and we'll be seeing you again at some point.